The day my remains washed up on the beach, my forensic fiancé was kissing his first love by the seaside. He jokingly nudged me further away with the tip of his shoe. Tell me, if karma really exists, would my father's murderer also die this miserably? I looked at the damaged badge on the corpse and a tear of self-mockery rolled down my cheek. No, he wouldn't. I had already been brutally murdered by the killer, taking the truth with me. At this moment, she is not only unharmed, but also intimately entangled with the victim's family by the sea. As the tide rose at night, my body was smashed against the rocks by the waves, my face was scratched, my flesh turned inside out, unrecognizable, and the body was decaying in many places, with obvious swelling and bulging in the chest and abdomen. Even I found it eerie and horrifying. A water ghost floated next to me, shaking her head as she looked at my corpse. Such deep hatred, stabbed so many times. It's like a fishing net. My gaze swept over the moonlit sea surface and looked at the lovers close by, a self-mocking smile forming on my lips. No hatred, just accidentally sacrificed myself while trying to help my boyfriend resolve his issues. He must really love you to make you risk your life, said the water ghost, a young girl whose eyes, soaked too long in seawater, had turned a deep green, now shimmering with a faint longing for love. I smirked sarcastically, pointing at the couple embracing on the bridge. There he is, Jackson whispered something into Susan's ear, her eyes and brows filled with laughter. The evening breeze messed up her long hair by her temples, and Jackson reached out to smooth her disheveled locks, his large hand wrapping around her slender waist as they kissed unabashedly under the dim streetlights. Actually, if they just turned their heads towards the rocks, they could see my body, bloated from soaking in the seawater. Unfortunately, at this moment, they only had eyes for each other, and as for everyone else, they had never really noticed them from the beginning. The water ghost paused for a moment, gently touching my head with her wet palm. Sister, it's okay, only those who drown are trapped in the water. Bring them over here, and I'll drag them to hell to pay for your life. I gently shook my head to refuse her offer. From the first day my spirit drifted in the sea, I knew that water ghosts seeking to exchange lives with the living was a grave sin. Moreover, Susan had killed my unborn child. How could a woman with such a filthy heart deserve to share the same sea as my corpse? Not long after I died, I drifted back to Jackson to see him one last time. At that time, he sat in the car, seriously adjusting the Windsor knot tie around his neck in the car mirror, the dark red stripes eerily familiar, stretching up from his tall neck to his full Adam's apple. The phone beside him kept lighting up with new messages. His movements were a bit unnatural, his normally calm and restrained eyes now filled with restlessness and discomfort. I followed him as he walked into the noisy and bustling private room. Under the dim lights, the lively and chatty old classmates suddenly quieted down, their eyes simultaneously sweeping towards the half-drunk attractive figure on the sofa. The woman extended her hand to him. Jackson. Jackson walked straight to her, took the wine glass from her hand, set it on the table, and responded in a barely audible voice. In the dim light of the private room, his profile was indistinct, but the eyes he turned towards the woman seemed to cross through the torrents of time, appearing distant yet unable to hide the tenderness hidden deep within. Stop drinking, you get rashes when you drink. I stood there in silence, a faint stabbing pain in my chest reminding me that, after all these years, he still hadn't forgotten her. Susan was Jackson's first love when he was younger, and their breakup was quite embarrassing. To repay her father's huge debts, she dropped out of college and married a wealthy businessman abroad, who was over 50. Jackson and I moved in similar social circles, so I naturally heard the same news he did. Wealthy people always have some peculiar hobbies that they don't share with outsiders. Susan hadn't been doing well in recent years. Half a month ago, news of her return to the country spread in our circles, and I distinctly noticed a change in Jackson's emotions. He often sat alone on the balcony, smoking until the glowing cigarette butt burned his fingertips, jolting him out of his reverie. Several times, I woke up in the middle of the night to find the bed cold and empty next to me, with Jackson sitting quietly in the living room, lonely and desolate, his fingers restrained yet enduring as they danced on the keyboard. They say a woman's intuition is incredibly accurate. I immediately linked his change in behavior to Susan's return. Because of this, Jackson and I had the most intense argument ever. I tried to snatch his phone, but he smashed it on the floor first, shattering the screen. "Lily, it's never going to happen between her and me. What are you so suspicious about?" Suspicious? Was it really suspicion? That night, I stared at the darkened phone screen on the floor, tears uncontrollably streaming down my face. "Do you still love her?" Jackson was silent for a long time, not answering my question. His voice was hoarse as he said, "Her dad killed my dad in a hit and run. There's a life between us. It can never happen." He repeated that last sentence twice, as if to convince me or perhaps to reassure himself. He came over and embraced me, his warm palms soothingly stroking my back. "We're about to get married, aren't we? Let's not let these baseless issues erode our relationship." At that moment, I didn't realize the deep implications hidden beneath his words. I just lost myself bit by bit in his rare tenderness and patience, even trying to help him resolve the emotional entanglement that had troubled him for years. I risked my life. In the lively atmosphere of the private room, Susan excused herself to sober up and left the room. Soon after, Jackson followed her, and everyone present seemed to understand the situation. Amid the sighs and whispered discussions of the crowd, I faintly heard my name. A half-drunk Susan staggered, leaning against the smooth, white corridor wall. Her slender shoulders drooped as she let out a suppressed sob, clearly audible in the deserted hallway. Jackson stood a short distance behind her, hands in his pockets, his brow sharp and his dark eyes cold and emotionless. "Why are you crying? Wasn't it my relative who died?" His voice was deep, tinged with a faint mockery, yet it concealed a barely noticeable concern. Startled, Susan turned around, her gaze lingering lovingly on his face. Upon seeing the tie around his neck, tears began to flow freely from her eyes. Jackson froze, his lips parted, harsh words unspoken, swallowed by her sudden kiss. The scene before me was too much to bear. My chest felt as if it were being sliced by a knife, and my hands shook uncontrollably. I shouted loudly, "Push her away, Jackson, push her away now. You promised me, you said you wouldn't get involved with her again." I protested. The colorful lights on the corridor ceiling dazzled, casting an ambiguous glow on the two of them. No one cared about my cries. All I could do was watch helplessly as Susan clung tightly to his midsection, repeatedly tiptoeing to kiss the corners of his lips. From an initial stiffness of disbelief, Jackson eventually placed his hand on the back of her head, deepening the kiss with a force that was fierce, retaliatory, and possessive. I curled up into a ball, my heart spasming with pain, a pain more intense than a knife plunging into my body before death, overshadowed by the betrayal I was experiencing. "Jackson, I'm sorry. We live in guilt every day. I'm willing to atone for his sins in my next life," Susan pleaded. Her cheeks flushed and her eyes misty as she curled up in his embrace. "You still keep the tie I gave you. That means you haven't forgotten me, right?" His response was a passionate kiss on her ear, biting down so hard that his gums bled. "Forget you? I wish I could revenge myself on you day and night." Jackson had never shown such unrestrained emotions to me. In front of me, he was always composed and self-restrained, maintaining a decorous and ascetic image even in our most intimate moments. As if he was the only one involved. "Jackson, please don't marry Lily just to get back at me, okay?" Susan interrupted my thoughts, sobbing softly as she nestled against his chest. Hearing my name jolted Jackson, as if he had just remembered my existence, remembered that he had a girlfriend. He released the woman in his arms and stepped back, returning to the cold, distant demeanor I knew so well. He fell silent for a moment, his eyes downcast, non-committal, his expression dark and unreadable. I laughed mockingly, tears once again brimming in my eyes. Looking up at the glaring colored lights, I covered my eyes with trembling hands, but tears still streamed through my fingers. Years ago, Susan's father had committed a hit-and-run while drunk, killing several pedestrians, including Jackson's father who was returning home from work. His mother became ill from the shock and passed away not long after. Back then, he had just started college. The loss of both parents was too much for a young adult to bear. Susan, on the other hand, was quickly sent abroad by her family, settling overseas after marrying. During those years, Jackson, stripped of his pride, lived cautiously, and I was there to help him through it bit by bit. We lived in the worst basements, shared cheap street-side dumplings. Over the years, I helped him rise from obscurity to become a renowned chief forensic pathologist. We moved into a new house and were planning to get married. Did Susan think a flippant mention of revenge could negate all that Jackson and I had shared? I wanted to object, to argue, but Jackson's silent consent chilled me to the bone. We had embraced through countless days and nights. During those kisses, had he ever truly meant them? Was there ever a moment when he touched me, thinking of spending the rest of his life with me? Looking back now, he had promised to marry me, to start a family with me. But it seemed he had never promised to love me. Perhaps it was because Susan had been there during the time his love was most pure and intense, so no matter how hard I tried later, in his eyes, I could never. That position remains irreplaceable. The spikes I had always used to protect myself seemed to be suddenly stripped away, leaving only the bloody scars behind, reminding me, Jackson, he never truly loved me. Both returned to the private room one after the other. As the reunion dinner prepared specially for Susan was drawing to a close, at the end of the dinner, one of Jackson's close classmates asked why I hadn't come, wondering if I was busy with wedding preparations. Susan just turned her face, and our eyes met. She's out of town on a case, Jackson answered dismissively, without mentioning the wedding. He still didn't know that I was already dead, killed by the father of his unforgettable first love. At that moment, I suddenly looked forward to him seeing my body. He's a forensic expert, accustomed to life and death, deeply superstitious about spirits. He once told me that the most feared thing in his forensic career was encountering a phenomenon known as the giant's gaze, and after I died for him, the waves just happened to wash my body into his jurisdiction. Before the body was identified, he had to personally perform the autopsy. He would understand more clearly than anyone else what tortures I had suffered before my death, but he didn't know that the source of all this evil was gifted to me by his cherished first love. While handling my body, he must have been very irritable. It was an unmistakable disgust. Perhaps he might even complain to his colleagues, but soon, all the test reports would prove it. That body was me. Perhaps his police colleagues might even discover that I was murdered by his first love because of him. And there he was, just recently holding the daughter of his father's killer, publicly disparaging my body. Perhaps my prayers had some effect. Susan asked him to go to the beach to sober up. I quietly floated in the air, watching them tenderly reluctant to leave each other, reminiscing about their youthful days as they stood by the sea breeze. Susan walked to the shore, picked up some pebbles, and threw them into the water one by one. The night was dark, the sky smeared with thick ink. The faint stars barely visible, my body hidden in this airtight darkness, silently accompanying them. Jackson, worried that she might dirty her shoes and stockings in the dark night, gently coaxed her back to the shore. His tone was indescribably gentle and calm. Susan stood closer to my body, seemingly smelling a faint stench of decay in the air. That smells awful. Dead fish and shrimp are common in the sea, and the villagers nearby like to dump their dead cats and dogs here. Probably gathering quite a few lost souls. She ran scared to the shore, flinging herself into his arms, playfully pounding on his chest. Jackson's voice carried a hint of laughter, blurting out, "She's really timid. If it were Lily, she might have dragged me to study how long they've been dead." Susan paused, lifting her head in astonishment. Jackson also paused, surprised as the name he had deliberately ignored all night slipped out unintentionally, and his mood suddenly shifted. The considerate Susan immediately sensed his change and brought me up. "What about Lily? Haven't seen her for a long time. Won't she welcome me back?" Jackson controlled his emotions, frowning slightly. "No, weren't you two best friends?" Susan scoffed. "Best friends? Huh, he's going to take away the person I love the most." There was a moment of silence in the air, and her face gradually grew solemn amid the man's silence. She nestled into Susan's arms, her beautiful jawline lazily resting on his shoulder, rubbing gently in an indescribably tender manner. Then, a wave struck, and my lifeless body floated with it, my hair tips brushing past Susan's sandal-clad ankles. Unaware, she snuggled into Jackson's embrace, and as the waves continued to push forward, my broken, cold, and stiff shoulders bumped against her smooth toes. Instinctively, Susan stepped back. With her movement, Jackson finally stumbled because of me. The bright moonlight shone on my unrecognizable face. The scene was just as I had envisioned it. At the sight of the body, Jackson's brow furrowed, and his expression turned ugly. The body was severely bloated, the skull barely covered with sparse hair. The facial muscles had decayed, and there were even signs of visits from marine life. The face was so damaged that even I couldn't recognize it. Jackson forced a smile. Maintaining his composure in front of Susan, with a look of disgust, he nudged my body slightly away with the tip of his shoe and jokingly asked Susan, "What do you think, if karma really does exist? Would my father's murderer end up dying this miserably?" I looked at the damaged police badge on the corpse and a tear of self-mockery fell from my eye. No, it wouldn't be. I had been brutally murdered by the killer. Carrying the truth with me, at this moment, not only is she unharmed, she's also intimately entwined with the victim's family by the seaside. Susan stepped back innocently, unable to stop vomiting in horror. Jackson made a call, and the body was quickly loaded into a criminal investigation vehicle. Finally, Jackson had time to attend to Susan, who stood pale and dazed beside him. He started to remove his white gloves, his palm about to touch her back when she swiftly dodged away. The disgust and revulsion in her eyes flashed briefly, quickly captured by Jackson. He stared blankly at his empty palm, his lips slightly pursed, a silhouette of sunlight casting shadows over his eyes as if he suddenly remembered something. His face remained expressionless, but his fingertips repeatedly rubbed the callus on his forefinger, a subconscious action when he was troubled. "This place isn't for you," he said coldly, leaving Susan behind as he turned and walked away. I sat in the passenger seat beside him, watching him light a cigarette, his fingertips glowing red as he gently tapped the ash-laden cigarette. He once told me that many forensic experts develop a smoking habit, not out of fondness but because the scent at the scene is overwhelming, and the smoke helps considerably to mask the odor of decay. Jackson smoked several in a row, the car long clear of any putrid smell, yet his cigarette stub never ceased. Finally, in irritation, he unlocked his phone, his eyes shimmering with an unusual emotion in the darkness. Leaning forward, I saw him open our chat conversation. How ironic, after being rejected by his first love, he finally remembered me. The latest message was from 7 days ago, which I forwarded to him, a selection of sample photos from a bridal studio. I sent them for his opinion. He casually replied with just 2 words, "Up to you." His tone was carefree, and I was sure he hadn't even opened the link. I told him I'd be traveling for a few days. 7 days ago, maybe he was too busy. Or maybe he just didn't care. During all that time, he hadn't initiated a single message to me. As I was lost in thought, Jackson opened the link and sent a message. The first set, "Red suits you." He stared at the screen for a long time, his fingers tapping unconsciously, but no reply came from the other end. After extinguishing the cigarette but in his hand, he crushed it into a ball, took one last look at the screen, and irritably tossed his phone onto the dashboard. Then he slumped back into his seat, resting his elbow on his face, and sighed deeply, covering the restlessness and unease in his eyes. My body was wheeled into the autopsy room. Because the examination was challenging, it took Jackson quite some time. By the time he finished collecting blood from the apex of my heart and left the autopsy room, it was already midnight. Susan was waiting for him at the door, her eyes and brows softened, her demeanor clear and composed. She looked once again like the aloof rich girl she used to be. Jackson handed the samples to his assistant for a DNA test, while he stood in the hallway chatting with Susan, perhaps sensing Susan's aversion to forensic work. Jackson's attitude towards her cooled significantly. Was he thinking about me, missing his cheap fiancé who didn't mind his stench of death, who was inseparable when close and striving alone when apart? Maybe it was because I was always too understanding of him that he never cherished what I gave. In a daze, I saw Jackson's assistant stumbling out. She had been with Jackson for many years, steady, experienced, and skilled, but now, her pupils dilated, her voice choked, trembling, unable to utter a complete sentence. "Forensic Jackson." Jackson replied indifferently, "If the database can't pull up the victim's information, let the criminal investigation department handle it. It's been pulled up, checked several times, and the results are the same. The body, it's Officer Lily, your fiancé." Jackson froze. He turned around, stared at my body for a long time, then inexplicably started laughing. "Nonsense, Lily is currently in another province. Curse her again and I'll dock your pay." The assistant choked, her facial muscles stiff, her mouth opened, but she couldn't call out my name. Jackson's brain seemed to crash as he laughed stiffly for a while, then with a trembling voice, he said again, It can't be her, you're acting so real. It can't be her. The assistant, trembling, stuffed the report into Jackson's chest. According to the records, the samples on the glass dish matched the database information for me. Jackson's face slowly changed. I saw his expression stiffen, and as he looked up again, his complexion turned deathly pale as if the blood had been drained from his face in an instant. How is this possible? It can't be. There must be some mistake. I'll take the samples again. He staggered into the autopsy room, his tall frame slightly hunched, but he stopped not far from my body. How could a scientific test be wrong? He was a forensic pathologist. He knew better than anyone that science doesn't lie. Jackson slowly approached the body, which had swelled several times due to the spread of decay gases, almost too large for the spacious autopsy table. He slowly crouched down, as if frozen, his emotions violently trembling in his eyes. Unable to stop shaking, repeating over and over, "Why did this happen? Why did this happen?" His voice sounded choked in his throat, sour and harsh. The usually steady tone now markedly trembled. "Weren't we still going to take wedding photos, Lily? We were going to get married, Jackson." "Death is irreversible." Susan crouched down to comfort him in a soft voice, her face showing a sorrow that seemed almost like a facade. I had studied microexpressions in psychology, and the sadness in her eyes didn't reach deep, with even a slight upward curve at the corners of her lips. She wasn't surprised by my death. On the contrary, it seemed as if she had known about it all along. In an instant, a bold idea struck me, leaving my body rigid. Susan knew that it was her father who had caused my death. I strained to remember the signs leading up to my demise, searching for any clues I might have overlooked. My head felt as if it had been struck by a hammer, with a numbing sensation that made everything before my eyes swirl. I reached my hand to the back of my head, and in a haze, flashes of memory surged forward. A week ago, I had taken some long-saved vacation time off work early. As I was packing, I saw Jackson on the balcony, playing with a cat while replying to messages on his phone. I told him I would be traveling to a nearby city for some time and would bring back good news upon my return. Jackson paused, his tone unusually pleading. "Does it have to be this week? Every year around this time, his mood would be low due to the upcoming anniversary of his father's death. In past years, I had always been there with him, preparing everything for the tomb visit and the memorial service. This year, I wanted to free him from the burdens that had haunted him for years, so I chose to be absent." I nodded, continuing to pack without pausing, noticing white cat hair sticking to my clothes. The rash on my arm, which hadn't quite subsided, seemed to flare up again. I opened a drawer, took an allergy pill, and turned around to discuss the cat's situation with Jackson, but I found him with his head bowed, tenderly smoothing the cat's fur, his smile much more vivid than when he saw me, noticing my gaze. He simply responded softly, "Stay safe." The words I wanted to say were swallowed back down. "It's fine, as long as he's happy." I had hoped this trip would yield some results, but the informant's clues I was following were preemptively seen through by William. By the time I arrived at his hideout, he had vanished, and all traces of his presence were meticulously erased. I stomped my foot in frustration. It was always just a bit too late. William seemed to have a tracking device on me, always slipping away right before I could catch him. The frustration felt like a boulder on my chest, suffocating me. Unable to bring the good news I had promised to Jackson weighed heavily on my conscience. On the way back, the informant provided me with new information. She directed me to an old villa that used to belong to Susan's family. The place had been abandoned for many years because it was the home of a murderer, even though the court had seized it for a property auction. It attracted little interest and over time had become desolate. The yard was overgrown with weeds, but to my surprise, there was a path trampled through the grass, leading straight to the basement exit of the villa. Years ago, Susan had taken me and Jackson to that basement. It was a spacious and quiet refuge, a place where wealthy families once hid from disasters. Susan had boasted at the time that with enough food stored, one could survive there for a year or more. I tensed up and, relying on memory, made my way through the half-height exit. Sure enough, I found signs of someone living there, and William, who should have been spending his remaining years miserably in prison, was present. He seemed just as surprised to see me, kneeling on the ground. He begged me not to turn him in. However, capturing him had already become a mission etched into my very blood. There was no possibility of letting him go. When William realized his pleas were futile, he attempted to fight back. I was the best at fight in my team, and years of living a life in hiding, always on the run, had worn William down. It didn't take much effort to subdue him, he roared, hurling the foulest insults at me. Damn bitch, you've been chasing me for years, Jackson has already dropped it, yet you keep hounding me. Did I kill your father or something? Think you're something special because you're a cop. You're still picking up the men my daughter doesn't want. I pinned his arm against the wall, holding him there. William, you have 3 lives on your conscience. If you are any kind of man, think of your wife and daughter. I couldn't finish my sentence before a loud crash interrupted me. The sound of an iron rod striking a skull echoed in my ears, a massive pain spreading from the back of my head throughout my body, plunging everything before me into murky darkness. William, having freed himself, muttered something indistinct. I couldn't make it out, only sensing the roaring in my ears that came wave after wave. It seemed like someone responded to him, a soft, young woman's voice. The physical agony took all my attention. Soon the pain pierced through my skin continuously at my waist, abdomen, heart, and back. It was the chilling, icy sensation of a blade entering my body. I didn't even have time to cry out in pain before someone slashed my throat. The thick, bitter taste of blood spreading in my mouth, until I lost consciousness. I endured an extreme agony that seemed almost beyond human endurance. Looking back now, the person who ambushed me from behind had to be Susan. She might even have been involved in plotting the whole ordeal. The news of my death spread quickly. The first to arrive were my colleagues from the police station. Leading them was my mentor, a senior officer of few words but meticulous in his duties. I had learned most of what I knew from him. To me, he was not just a mentor, but also family. With a stern face, previously unseen hardness in his demeanor, his gaze paused briefly on Susan when it swept over to Jackson, filled with mockery and scorn. He had handled William's drunk driving hit-and-run case years ago. He knew the relationship among the 3 of us better than anyone. Lily hasn't contacted you in days, and you didn't notice anything unusual. Jackson buried his face in his hands, his exposed arms bulging with veins as if he was desperately trying to contain his emotions on the brink of collapse. She said she was on a business trip out of town. I had no idea. My mentor's lips turned white, the stubble at his temples trembling with anger as he shouted, a business trip, my foot. She took a long leave and you, her fiancé, didn't even know where she was. Yet you had the energy to remain entangled with your ex-girlfriend. How could you deserve her? Jackson looked dazed, overwhelmed by the scolding. When he came to his senses, he realized Susan was still holding onto his arm, standing very close to him. As if stung, he suddenly stood up, shaking off Susan's touch, his movements frantic, his eyes bloodshot and frighteningly red. I had never seen Jackson like this before, like a beast trapped in a snare. Filled with a sense of defeat, in that moment, I felt that perhaps he did have some feelings for me. The sadness on his face was genuine. My death had affected him more than I had imagined. The master looked at him with disapproval in his eyes. Do you have her parents' contact information? Do you know whom Lily had been in contact with before her death? The murderer was brutal. Each stab was lethal. It was clearly a vengeance killing. She probably knew her attacker. Jackson stood there dazed, his nearly 6'3" frame suddenly stooping. His lips moved, but no useful words came out. I don't know. Standing beside him, I watched as his face seemed to age in an instant and said with self-mockery, of course, you wouldn't know. It had always been me who intruded into his life, trying to understand all his likes and dislikes, accommodating his lifestyle. The loved one is bold without fear. The lover is overly cautious. He always remembered that Susan would get a rash from drinking, yet he had no clue about my allergy to cat fur. Perhaps he knew, but he didn't care, choosing to ignore how I felt. The kitten he brought home was actually the one he and Susan had adopted together back then. He lied to me, saying he found it on the street. I always knew the truth but never confronted him, fearing an outburst that would force him to choose between the cat and me, and he would choose the latter. I didn't want that to happen, so I simply never gave him the choice. Jackson treasured his memories with her but was unwilling to spare a bit of his care for me. When passion is exhausted, all that remains are fatigue and indifference. At this moment, I didn't even have the strength to cry, utterly drained. I just wanted to leave this place, find somewhere to hide, and wait for the day when the souls lingering in this world would be taken away. These rules of the spirit world were taught to me by a ghost girl from the sea. Sometimes, being with ghosts feels more liberating than being with people, but I couldn't leave, because my master had found my family's contact information and notified them of my death. They were the closest people I had in this world. Seeing them one last time would leave no regrets. Yet it was these people, who should have been my haven, who pushed me into the storms of the world. My parents arrived quickly. I could hear my mother's cries before I saw them, piercing through the quiet corridor. The staff led them to the morgue. The body has been in the seawater for too long, and the face is severely damaged. Please be prepared. My mother's hurried steps faltered, and she hesitated at the door of the morgue, leaning on the frame. My father, a bit braver, didn't enter either but turned to ask, "The body, can it still be used?" The staff furrowed their brows, not understanding. But I immediately grasped his meaning. My path to adulthood was far from smooth. After a falling out with my parents years ago, they had declared we would never contact each other again. Yet half a month ago, they began desperately trying to reach me, wanting me to come home because my sister missed me. This drama had played out countless times over the past 20 years. I knew what they were really thinking. But blood ties are hard to sever. I didn't believe they could be so heartless. I didn't believe that upon hearing of my death, they wouldn't be heartbroken. Now, disappointment engulfed me like a ferocious flood. I covered my ears, curled up in a corner, no longer wanting to hear another word from them, afraid of hearing more heartless remarks. Yet my father's detailed voice still drifted through the gaps between my fingers. My younger daughter has leukemia and needs a bone marrow transplant. Can the body still be used? If we can extract it, we'll take the body. If not, then dispose of it as you wish. Their final words were left unspoken, yet their meaning was clear. I suddenly felt grateful to William for throwing my body into the sea, otherwise, would have been forever used as a mere blood bank for their daughter. A loud crash echoed through the corridor as a glass window suddenly shattered. Looking up, I was shocked to see Jackson grabbing my father by the collar and forcefully pressing him against the window behind. The bloodthirsty gleam in his eyes was terrifying. My mother screamed and lunged forward, grabbing at his sleeve and scuffling with him. "You disaster, isn't it enough that you've brought death to your parents? Now you want to kill my daughter too? What are you trying to do now? Kill someone else? If Lily hadn't followed you, would she be lying in there? You didn't investigate your father's death. Instead, you had her work as a cop to solve your cases for you. It should be you who's dead." Staff quickly intervened to separate them, but Jackson seemed to lose all his strength and slumped onto the cold floor in disarray. On the 27th, my body was cremated, reduced to a small handful of ashes housed in a dark wooden box. Jackson carried it back to our home. It was my first return home since my death, though I had expected it. The sight of Susan playing with a kitten and finding unfamiliar dresses around the house still painfully stung my heart. In my absence, she had boldly assumed the role of the lady of the house. Susan's expression shifted uncomfortably when she saw Jackson return with the urn. "Do you intend to keep that thing in the room?" Jackson's gaze hardened as he shot back coldly. "This is Lily's home. I brought her back. Is there a problem?" Susan stiffened, clearly not expecting such a cold response. Tears quickly welled up in her eyes, and she began to sob pitifully, a tactic she had always used to manipulate him. Yet today, Jackson was unmoved and visibly impatient. "Stop crying, pack your things, and leave. We're not to meet again." Stunned, Susan stood frozen, tears poised on the brink of falling, seemingly in disbelief that he was setting such firm boundaries. "Jackson, are you really leaving me?" His voice was cold, his gaze as if he were looking at a stranger. "Susan, we broke up 7 years ago, right after your father killed mine and fled. We were never meant to be anything more. Did you ever think about the life I would lead when you left me abruptly?" Jackson's expression was one of sorrow as he clutched the urn a bit tighter, his eyes filled with remorse and sadness. "Those years, if it hadn't been for Lily, I don't know where I'd have ended up dead. If she hadn't stayed by my side, encouraging me, the Jackson standing before you today would be nothing but a worthless piece of trash. We were never meant to be together. I blame myself for not seeing it sooner, for neglecting Lily while chasing after fleeting old feelings. Now, I'm being punished by fate. He's taken my Lily, and it's all my own doing." His voice broke, his fingers trembling as he held the urn, tears continuously falling onto the lid. Susan, startled by his resolute words, turned pale, a mix of resentment and jealousy flashing in her eyes. But she's dead now, and I'm the one alive in front of you. Jackson, provoked like a wounded animal, suddenly became irate. Shut up, you have no right to meddle in my affairs with her. And about the cat, Lily was allergic to cats, and since it's yours, you take care of it. His icy tone was colder than the snow in the dead of winter. Susan was momentarily stunned, then with tears in her eyes, she forced a mocking smile. Jackson, it's just the two of us here now. Lily is dead. Who are you putting on this show of deep affection for? If you truly loved her, why did you keep your ties with me uncut? Lily was allergic to cat hair. Did you only find out today? Don't deny it. You enjoyed seeing her endure humiliation for your sake. You must have felt great seeing Lily neglect herself for your love, didn't you? Why do you think we fell in love? You are selfish and hypocritical, always blaming others. We are birds of a feather, Jackson. Like a fraudster whose disguise has been stripped away, flushed red with anger, he set down my urn, rushed over to Susan, and with a swing of his arm, slapped her to the ground. Susan started to laugh maniacally, staggering away amid Jackson's incoherent shouts to leave. I hovered in the air, silently watching as Jackson finally calmed down and cleaned the house spotlessly, removing every speck of dust and strand of hair. Then, he placed the urn in the most prominent spot. He murmured continuously, repeating, "You won't have to deal with things you don't like ever again." But then, why now? I am already dead. I won't be around anymore either. A few days later, news came from the station that the murderer had been caught. William was arrested more quickly than I had expected. My master mobilized all police forces, who worked day and night to track him down, and quickly arrested him on his escape route out of the province. In the interrogation room, he confessed to his crimes without denial but deliberately omitted any trace of Susan's involvement in the case. However, my master, with his extensive experience, saw through the deception almost immediately and with a few probing questions, exposed William's lies. Jackson burst into the observation room, just in time to see William sitting in the interrogation chair, detailing the crime process. His chest heaved violently as he uncontrollably pounded on the glass. 7 years ago. You killed my father. Now, can you really bear to kill my fiancé too? Coincidentally, my master was also probing this issue. After being exposed, William nearly lost his mind. He ranted madly, "That damn woman, she's been after me for 7 years. Wouldn't I have been driven to extremes to actually kill? She never understood why. Every time she learned of my whereabouts, she could never catch me. Ha ha ha. Go ask Jackson, he knows best. It was he who told our Susan about Lily's whereabouts." The interrogation room fell silent, everyone's faces filled with shock. Jackson was no exception, but he didn't freeze for long. He went mad wanting to confront William, but as he stood at the door, he suddenly stopped and knelt down, as if he suddenly remembered something, his expression turning extremely pained. Susan, under the guise of caring, had been asking about Lily's schedule. Was she fishing for information from me? My whole body trembled, staring intently at him. How ridiculous. The wish that I had always tried to fulfill for him turned out to be hindered most by him himself. How foolish I had been in the past, giving my all for such a man, ultimately costing my life. An uncontrollable hatred swept through my body, the resentment and pain before death, the betrayal and abandonment I suffered, came crashing down on me like a stormy tsunami. I almost drowned again in this disaster. Jackson leaned against the wall, slowly sliding down to the floor. He slapped his face frantically, over and over again, until his cheeks were swollen and the marks of his palms were clearly visible. I watched everything unfold with a sneer, my hatred unabated. It wasn't enough, nowhere near enough. If William was the murderer who took my life, then Jackson was his accomplice. Now, with a face full of regret and despair, who was he trying to impress? Belated affection is worthless. I don't need it. I wished I could kill him myself. To make him feel the agony I suffered before death, my master emerged from the interrogation room, forcefully swinging open the door of the observation room, a semi-retired man in his 50s or 60s, his eyes bloodshot. He grabbed Jackson from the floor and punched him fiercely twice. None of the colleagues standing nearby stepped forward to intervene. Jackson's gaze was vacant, his body stiff as dead wood. Not resisting or moving, enduring the beating and scolding as if all hope was lost. Appearing utterly hollow, lying on the ground like an empty shell, My master glared furiously, his eyes cold as if looking at a dead man. Who are you putting on this act for now that she's dead? When that girl first joined the police force, I knew you two weren't right for each other. But she was completely devoted to you, Jackson. Did you think she couldn't find anyone else to marry her except for you? I'm telling you, you were never good enough for her. She was so young. Yet she died because of a scumbag like you. You should spend the rest of your life living in remorse. Jackson covered his cheeks with his hands, tears streaming down, biting his lower lip to keep himself from making a sound until blood mixed with tears fell onto the floor. The overhead light shone on his disheveled hair, highlighting his forlorn, degraded state, a far cry from his once dignified and reserved demeanor. Years later, the criminal suspect William, who had evaded capture for 7 years, was finally detained, and his information was released online. The families he had victimized over the years all came forward, demanding a severe sentence. The public was outraged upon learning that a female police officer had been killed by William and his daughter during an arrest. Numerous media outlets covering the case dug up information about Susan. Some netizens claiming to be classmates of the suspect disclosed that Susan's family had transferred their assets and sent their daughter abroad immediately after learning they had to pay compensation for a fatal accident. After returning to the country, she continued her messy relationship with her ex-boyfriend, vividly detailing the intricate dynamics between the three of them. This revelation sparked public fury. Scumbags and vile women, they all deserve to rot in prison. This guy is disgusting, getting back together with his ex-girlfriend even after his father was killed in an accident. His moral compass is lower than a dog's. I hope the female officer finds a better person in her next life and becomes a better version of herself. After a long 7-year investigation, the case was finally resolved. Susan was eventually sentenced for harboring and aiding a criminal. William, responsible for 4 deaths, had a severely detrimental impact on society and was sentenced to death. My funeral was arranged by my colleagues in the police force. It was held in a cemetery with a wide-open view. After several days of gloomy weather, it finally cleared up. The clouds, dense and low due to the high elevation of the graveyard, seemed close enough to touch. My master, holding a bunch of kapok flowers, placed them in front of my tombstone and brushed off the dust with his hand. His voice choked up, yet he pretended to be cheerful. You stubborn girl, you promised to take care of me. How could you bear to leave before me? I am at the age to retire, and I wasn't planning on taking any more apprentices, but you insisted on pestering me. I originally planned for you to offer incense for me during Qingming, but now, well, the master stood still, and I stood behind him, feeling his spine suddenly stoop, his back trembling severely. Tears streamed down my face as I looked at my former comrades, unable to speak through my sobs. After the funeral, I stayed in the cemetery, lying on the grass, watching the clouds. My figure has become blurred, thin as an invisible veil, as if it could be blown away at any moment. My time left in this world is short. I looked at the black and white photo on my tombstone, a rare smile curling at the corners of my mouth. Although I joined the police force because of Jackson, every day here has been truly joyful. The photo was taken in my first year at the police academy, my smile genuine and my every action vibrant, full of hope for my career and expectations for love. I lived my imperfect life boldly and freely. I immersed myself in memories of the past, recalling the rare carefree moments of my life, and yet, someone inconsiderate had to appear before me, irritating me. Lily. Jackson stood in front of the tombstone, placing a bunch of white chrysanthemums. He looked gaunt, his whole person exuding a defeated aura. He looked like a completely different person after just a few days. His eyes were hollow, his cheeks sunken, clearly not eating well. He squatted beside my tombstone, rambling on about many things, from when we first met, to the times we supported each other and advanced together. He recounted everything clearly, even memories I had begun to blur seemed vivid to him. The first time I saw you, we were only about 15 or 16. You had your hair in a ponytail, acting mature beyond your years, living boldly like a little son. I had heard about your family situation and never imagined such a family could nurture someone as lively and active as you, Lily. Actually, before you noticed me, I was already drawn to you, but Jackson hung his head in frustration, his fingertips gently tracing over my photograph, his movements tender and slow, as if afraid to disturb me. Your parents weren't wrong, I am a disaster. If it weren't for being with me, you could have had a better life. His tone was calm, but I could hear the despair and self-loathing, until the night fell, and the vast starry sky covered the entire dome above. The man leaning against the tombstone finally stirred. His cheeks were deathly pale, his lips wrinkled, his hand covering his stomach, his body in agony. I knew he was having a stomach attack. I quietly watched him, my heart already without ripples. If he wanted to torment himself by belittling himself, it was out of my hands. Jackson shifted his body, stood up, his pupils lifeless. Lily, the days without you are too hard. I was taken aback, suddenly understanding what he intended to do. Sure enough, I followed him to the sea. Under the moonlight, the sea was so quiet you couldn't hear the flow of the water, calm without a single ripple, like a heavenly mirror. Jackson stood on the shore, staring quietly at the sea below. His voice hoarse as if spilling from his throat. If I jump from here, can I see you again? I scoffed. You won't see me. Before, I followed him step by step, appearing in front of him whenever he wanted to see me. But now I'm tired. I don't want him anymore. The world is so big. Where is he going to find me? Unbeknownst to me, a water ghost drifted up beside me. You're still here. I thought you had reincarnated. Jackson waded through the water, constantly calling out my name. It was too noisy. I really don't want to see him. A water spirit stirred up the waves, pushing him back to the shore. He got up, gazed at the moon on the horizon in confusion, and murmured, Lily, is that you? Are you the one saving me? But how could I bear to let you die alone? The seawater is so cold, so fishy, so salty. Let me keep you company. In the next life, it will be my turn to accommodate you. He waded back towards the sea's surface. The water rose from his ankles to his chest. And he peacefully closed his eyes and lay back. I said to the water spirit, it's a pity we shared a bed in life. Let's not share a grave in death. The waves pushed him back to the shore again. Eventually, he collapsed on the shore, pulled out a scalpel, and trembling, stabbed it into his own heart. The water spirit comforted me. In the next life, he will make it up to you. I shook my head. What do I need his amends for? Can the suffering of this life really be compensated by the next? I do not wish to see him again, really. It just so happens. I have been trapped by this sea for too long. The sea surged and swallowed him up. He was pulled into the depths by the water spirit, his soul unable to find release, doomed to wait day after day for the next substitute. As for me, I am destined to step into my next new world, on my way to reincarnation. The newly freed water spirit asked me what I wanted to be in my next life. I said, I hope to be the spring breeze in my next life. Romantic and free, to see the landscapes I've never seen in this life, to pass through forests, wade through clear streams, climb high mountains, to rush towards the future, undefined. After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.